Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of Going for Two. No, your ears are not deceiving you. That is not the dulcet tones of Matt Brown. This is Bryan Fischer, his other co-host, flying solo this week as Matt enjoys some well-earned time off and some R&R with the kiddos there up in Chicago as they hit spring break, and he kind of takes a bit of certainly a break from all that he's been doing with both the Extra Points newsletter, which is still publishing a couple times this week, as well as this podcast. But we'll have him back for next week's edition, and I'm sure he will be nice and recharged and ready to go as we kind of hit the home stretch here with a lot of spring sports going on, a lot of conference realignment, a lot of discussion around college athletics that I'm sure we will enjoy getting his thoughts over. But until then, you got me changing the music, you got me changing a few of the graphics if you're watching along on YouTube. But a lot of fun going on here on the Going for Two podcast, because we're not stopping just because Matt is taking off. We got Chris Vannini for you of The Athletic, a senior writer over there, and I wanted to talk with Chris because of an interesting story that he wrote this past week. Obviously, everybody's focused on college football right now. Maybe we're just coming off the Masters, a lot of sporting events, but WrestleMania was also this past week, and obviously a lot of attention by a certain segment of the population into wrestling. But there is a bit of crossover here in terms of college athletics. The WWE doing a lot of NIL deals that we'll discuss with Chris a little bit about what their aims are, and obviously there's kind of a look towards the future as well for that organization. Triple H, for those of you who certainly know who that is kind of in charge of their upcoming development program, and I wanted to kind of dial down into that with Chris, not only because he was there in Dallas kind of covering the event, but can provide us some greater insights in terms of kind of the wrestling scene and how it crosses over with college football, because certainly if you're a fan of either, you probably have seen a bit of crossover, not just on Friday nights when there might be some SmackDown going on or on TV or something like that. There's a lot of crossover and a lot of ties between college football and wrestling in the WWE in particular. So happy to and excited to get into that with Chris in here in a little bit. Before then, though, if you're still listening, I want to thank you. Make sure you subscribe. Give us 5 stars. We really do appreciate it. It really helps a lot of other fans out there discover this podcast, whether it's on Spotify, Apple Podcast. Every 5 stars really does help. We do want to be, as Matt always likes to mention, we want to be Ohio State. We want to be Alabama. We want to have that top end recruiting class. We are getting down to certainly the crunch time in terms of hitting some of those deadlines with the NLI window closing, but we do appreciate all those everybody leaving 5 stars and making that process, a lot easier for folks to kind of find this podcast. I know we've got a couple new listeners that have always given us a shout out on Twitter, either at Matt Brown EP or at Bryan D. Fischer on Twitter. And we certainly appreciate you guys listening, telling your friends, and helping spread the word. If you're new to the podcast, though, you probably have not heard us say how you can also enjoy 15% off on your home field apparel order using the promo code Extra Points. I'm wearing we got the old Tulane Green Waves shirt going on today, but between Matt and I think we have, well over, probably 100 shirts, I would imagine, of home field apparel. And between that, the Doggers, they had some terrific stuff. We certainly are a proud partner of Home Field Apparel. And if you want 15% off that first order, be sure to use that promo code Extra Points. They got some great new stuff coming in right now. They're refreshing a couple lines. They obviously got, if you're a Kansas fan who's fresh off the national title, they've got some new stuff for you, as well as South Carolina. I had my Gamecock shirt on that I had a while back, a couple days ago, as a matter of fact. And I think if you're a fan of either of those schools, if you like cool logos, I think there's a little something for everybody. And as we kind of move into things like Mother's Day and Father's Day, as we kind of get into that kind of event season, be sure to, if somebody has a certain tie to a certain school, be sure to say 15% off while getting them one of the more comfortable shirts that they will ever wear from Home Field Apparel. But until then, I want to catch up with Chris. I know a lot of folks out there are some wrestling fans. I think they'll find this conversation interesting, whether you're, diehard WWE that watches every week, or you just kind of casually check in. I know personally, having lived overseas, my kind of pathway to wrestling and being a wrestling fan, growing up certainly in the 90s when these things were taken off. I used to get DVDs, of the wrestling. I guess they were maybe even CDs at the time, but weeks and weeks after they actually occurred in on television here in the States. Used to be able to watch them overseas with a couple of my buddies, and it really was a dose of Americana when I was living overseas. And so always fun to kind of see wrestling and how it's evolved over the last couple of years. We'll get into that with Chris, and certainly it's an interesting conversation if you're a college football fan because look, like I mentioned earlier, there's a bit of a crossover between what's going on with the WWE and the future of that organization, what some schools can learn in terms of what they're doing with NIL and other things, how they've marketed their product, how they've really changed the evolving nature of the media business. Really some fascinating stuff that we'll get into with Chris, and then we'll kind of close it out from there. But we really do appreciate everybody listening. We will be back again later this week as well with a special episode. But until then, let's bring in Chris and chat with him a little bit about his latest piece in the WWE and the WWE tryout for college football players and college athletes as well. All right, thrilled to be joined now by Chris Vannini, the senior writer for The Athletic. Be sure to thank Stuart Mandel for that title bump, but appreciate you jumping on with us, Chris.
Yeah, no problem. Appreciate you guys having me.
Absolutely. Well, listen, the latest piece you had about the Inside a WWE tryout, we will get to that. But I noticed you were in Tallahassee. You were checking out Florida State's. What is kind of this I guess this time of year like for you? I'm sure it's crisscrossing the country and seeing a lot of spring football.
Yeah, I am coming from my hotel room in Tallahassee instead of the office, typically back home. But I wanted to check out Florida State. They wrapped up spring practice today. This is obviously a big year for Mike Norvell there, kind of needing to turn that corner, so to speak. And I have not actually gotten out to much spring football this year. I know it's obviously the time of year when a lot of people do. Now that, we are largely past the pandemic's impact on football, I've visited some programs around Dallas where I live. And so this is my first trip out this spring, actually, and it's good to go.
You're definitely picking a good time to go to Tallahassee because if you end up going on a game week, I think your hotel there would probably be like about 4 or 5 times more expensive. But it's interesting. I'm just curious to maybe get your thoughts there on having seen the Noles in practice, how different they look. Obviously, it's been a program that has taken quite a few transfers the last couple of cycles. They have certainly kind of mined the Sunshine State for talent there. But you mentioned the predicament that Mike Norvell has. He does seem like he's upgraded the roster, but maybe not quite to the standards there of previous FSU teams.
Yeah, they lose Jermaine Johnson, who was the ACC Defensive Player of the Year on the defensive line. That's a big loss. He was a transfer from Georgia, obviously had a big year. But they did add Jared Verse, a transfer from Albany, who looked really good in the spring game, defensive line. So they look to be pretty strong there again. And, the big question obviously comes at quarterback, the skill position. Jordan Travis finished the year very strong. Florida State won 5 of their last 7. I think Travis had something like 16-2 touchdown interception ratio, but they lose that game to Florida at the end of the year, and they miss out on the bowl game for the second straight year. So they'll need some guys to step up, wide receiver, kind of the running back as well. So some of those skill spots that Mike Norvell has typically always had really good players, probably the biggest questions right now.
It seems like the Sunshine State in particular, I mean, that might be one of the more interesting spots in college football. I know you cover the group of 5. You got UCF there, certainly kind of looking ahead towards that transition to the Big 12 and Gus Malzahn being able to sell playing in a Power 5 league. You have a new coach in coming in at Florida. You obviously have some tough times there at USF, but they're building a new stadium on campus there. I think there's a little bit more momentum behind Jeff Scott's program just in terms of the off-the-field stuff going on there, even though it's been difficult on the field. And then you have Willie Taggart down there at FIU. You got a new regime coming in at FIU. It might be one of the more interesting spots. And that's not even getting to Miami down there with you and the upgrades that they're making under Mario Cristobal. It seems pretty like the state itself is going to produce some pretty interesting football in 2022.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a pretty down period here between FSU, Florida. I know Florida made the Cotton Bowl a couple years ago, but firing Dan Mullen last year, Miami hasn't. Miami fired Manny Diaz. UCF had a down year last year. USF has won 3 games the last couple of years. So there's reason for optimism at a lot of these places, I think. With Billy Napier, with Mario Cristobal, with the skill players have at UCF now. So it could be a really interesting year in the state of Florida for sure.
Do you anticipate a bounce back for Gus Malzahn? I know it wasn't quite the season they anticipated. Injuries, obviously, a key factor. I mean, even Gus himself was coaching from the sideline there in that little table, looking like a professor at times back in 2021. But I mean, what is kind of the outlook with UCF? And certainly, it's an intriguing American, if nothing else. You got Cincinnati coming off that playoff experience. You have a lot of, obviously, several teams kind of shuffling into the conference, others kind of on the verge of shuffling in. It kind of makes for quite the interesting group of five league.
Yeah, for as much of a down year as it was for UCF, they still went 9-4, and they beat Florida in the bowl game. One of the biggest wins in school history, just for what that meant. But they were, really hampered by injuries, like you said there. So coming into this year, they're pretty loaded, especially at the skill position at running back, at wide receiver. They got a lot of talent there. They brought in a number of transfers again, some SEC starters as well. Basically, I think comes down to the quarterback position. Mikey Keene was thrust in last year as I think it was a redshirt freshman, I think, and had some ups and downs. They bring in John Rice Plumlee from Ole Miss, who kind of has that running ability, fits what Gus Malzahn typically likes to do in that offense. So coming out of spring, they don't have a starting quarterback yet, but if they get that position squared away, if they get good play at that position, UCF should once again be contending for the American, I think.
Well, that'll definitely be an interesting conference race. And I know we can kind of head back home towards the DFW area where you're living right now. And obviously your latest piece was diving into a WWE tryout. And I find this fascinating. I know there might not be a whole lot of wrestling fans out there, but I think there is a little bit of crossover between college football fans that might enjoy that. But I'm curious, wrestling has always kind of had a college football flavor, to it. Obviously, it's Stone Cold Steve Austin. He played up there at North Texas. I believe you've even written about Roman Reigns and his days at Georgia Tech before he had that cup of coffee in the NFL. What is there? Why is there such a strong connection, I guess, between some of the stars at WWE and other places? But why is there that connection with college football in general? And do you think that that is something that the league itself is kind of looking to tap into going forward?
Yes, that is absolutely what WWE is trying to do. They're really going all in on college athletics now, and that's what that tryout last week around WrestleMania was. It was almost exclusively for college athletes. This is a push they started back in the summer away from signing so many maybe independent wrestlers, because they want to get these people in their early 20s, as opposed to someone's a former football player. Maybe they get into bodybuilding and they get to WWE when they're like 30 or something like that, and they discover it that way, or they do CrossFit and they find out later. WWE wants to get these wrestlers into their developmental system when they're 23, 24 years old. And there's a ton of college athletes in WWE. I mean, Ron Simmons, one of the greatest Florida State players of all time, he ended up becoming the first Black world champion in wrestling history. Stone Cold Steve Austin, except The Rock played at Miami. All their current top singles champions are former college athletes, and that includes the women. Charlotte Flair played volleyball at Appalachian State and NC State. Bianca Belair was a track and field runner at Tennessee. So WWE, with name, image, likeness, and being able to partner with a lot of these top athletes when they're in college, like Gable Steveson, the gold medal wrestler at Oklahoma, at Minnesota, AJ Ferrari, the national champion wrestler at Oklahoma State. They're trying to get these people on a path into WWE pretty much right out of college.
Is that like, I mean, what is the kind of normal talent pipeline? I'm always curious. Obviously, he sees these kind of stars, and I guess in my conscious that they kind of explode onto the scene. But when you're talking with Triple H, like, what is the kind of before they've got into this college athlete business to kind of mine it for pipeline, pipeline, and what was it kind of going into 5-10 years ago or even longer ago? Like how did they discover that those top tier wrestling talents? Was it finding somebody in some Memphis wrestling outfit and kind of bring them in, or has it been really a big sea change, I guess you could say, these last couple of years?
Yeah, it was either someone who loved wrestling and was trying to get into it, or somebody happened to spot you working out at the gym or working as a bouncer at a bar or something like that, and they thought you might look the part. You should check this out. Ron Simmons, like I said, he's a Hall of Famer in college football and WWE. He played football with who became Lex Luger, the wrestler. Ron Simmons he tried pro football for a little bit. He's working at a Tampa corrections facility, and a former teammate of his in the USFL, Lex Luger, says, "Hey, you should try this wrestling thing out." And that's how he gets into it. That basically you have to know somebody, or you have to have always loved it. And so WWE is now trying to get in front of the people who had never thought about it before, the people who maybe used to watch it as a kid, or they're kind of familiar with what it does, but they don't really think about it. It's as much as WWE pitching itself to these athletes as the athletes trying out to get in, because some of them either don't know what it's about, aren't interested, or just peripherally kind of aren't aware. So the NIL stuff, they brought a bunch of the NIL athletes to WrestleMania in the suite to check everything out, to be like, this is what you can be if you come here. So it's about getting in front of those people who had never really thought about it before.
It's so wild that, to me at least, that Triple H is kind of in charge of this endeavor, and obviously he's been involved in the company itself for a long time, and I know he just hung up his boots, and obviously he's had some health issues recently. But when you get to chat with him, what is he kind of looking for? Is there an attribute? Is it the showmanship? Is it the athleticism? Like when you're going through these tryouts and you're seeing these pretty successful college athletes. I mean, one of them was somebody from an all-conference FCS team. Like when he's actually kind of looking to be a talent spotter. Is there an attribute or something that he is kind of out there saying, I got to find this, because I know that's going to translate into becoming the next Rock, the next Roman Reigns?
You got to have the athletic ability for wrestling, and then you got to have the personality to go with it. I mean, at this tryout, they worked on a couple things in the ring. They taught you how to roll. They taught you how to run the ropes. They taught you how to fall back on your back, take a bump, essentially. And you had to figure that out. If you couldn't figure it out, they weren't going to move forward with you. So whether it was a football player or, Daniel MacArthur, 4-time All-American shot put thrower at North Carolina, you had to figure it out from a footwork standpoint, from a body control standpoint, physically. And then they also did what's called basically a promo competition, where they would be handed a bit of a script, and they had to memorize it and deliver it like they were speaking to a crowd. And so those are the two biggest factors that they look for. So you got to have the athletic ability, the body control, especially for a bigger guy, and then you got to be able to talk. That's half of what wrestling is.
And you mentioned the NIL program. I think that's the more interesting thing for a lot of the college administrators who maybe are not huge WWE fans, but I think that perked a lot of ears up when they first announced that. I don't know what kind of background you got in terms of that, but they've gotten some pretty big athletes already kind of in that stable that they've made NIL deals. Obviously, you mentioned Gable Stevenson, AJ Ferrari, some of the big names that I believe in the Cavender twins to kind of cross over into women's sports. I mean, what is the point of the NIL program if you're WWE? Is it just a kind of brand awareness exercise? Do they think that they can kind of have this kind of bridging the gap between those athletes that they kind of find as part of this tryout program? I mean, what are the aims for a company like WWE getting into the NIL space?
It's twofold. One of it is the brand awareness. Like I said, I mean, Daniel MacArthur, that North Carolina All-American shot put thrower, he saw that WWE was doing NIL within the track and field world. I think they signed somebody from Alabama. And so he reached out to WWE, said, "Hey, how can I get an NIL deal with you guys?" They said, "Hey, come to this tryout." So, and he got a contract at the tryout. So that half of it is getting WWE's brand, the NIL opportunities in front of people who maybe didn't consider it. The other part of it is simply WWE's looking to potentially make a career for you. Like, this is different than most NIL opportunities where it's just an endorsement. They're trying to get you on the career path into WWE. That's I talked to Jim at Influencer about, because WWE partnered with Influencer about a month ago, and so now WWE has access to all thousands of these athletes now who maybe they couldn't quite get in contact with before. So they're at WWE scouts are at the NFL Combine, at the National Scouting Combine, at Pro Days, at the NCAA Wrestling Championships, at track and field meets and stuff like that. So it is a full-on scouting, opportunity to find these people who are in college, say, "Hey, let's work on something here and develop a partnership." Gable Stevenson, he was in high demand last summer. He, especially coming after the Olympics, the UFC wanted him as well. So WWE is able to get in with that NIL deal, develop that relationship, and now that he's done it in Minnesota, he's going to be sliding into WWE here soon, pretty quickly.
I mean, is this a thing where they're going to go after kind of top tier college football players, or do you kind of ultimately kind of anticipate them just really kind of focusing on a market that really can serve them in terms of price and all that? Because it'll be fascinating to see if like a Blitnikoff Award winner or somebody like that's in the Heisman Trophy is suddenly doing WWE promos. I can't imagine they're getting to that point, especially given some of the dollar figures being thrown around some of these to high end athletes in terms of the NIL deals. But I would imagine that increasing that brand awareness is probably part of their aim, and that could be a big way to kind of get onto the college football scene is going after some even higher profile college football players.
Yeah, that's possible, but I do think that would largely be for the, like you said, the marketing brand awareness type of stuff. Like nobody's really expecting the Cavender twins to come to WWE when they're done. But they did do some football players. Joe Spivak, a lineman at Northwestern, Glenn Logan, a lineman, defensive lineman at LSU. They showed up to the tryout the last day as WWE brought everybody in to kind of show everybody things over the weekend. And talking to Joe, he's a really energetic, outgoing guy. He grew up loving wrestling, and he has had his pro days, and he's got to work out with the Bears, I think, pretty soon, if not already. He's going to give football that try, but if it doesn't happen, he's said he's going right down to Orlando just to start with WWE. So at the moment, WWE is looking at those fringe guys who don't get drafted, maybe don't make a team. I mean, the way Triple H said to me, he's like, NFL releases 500 players a year. The difference between the guys who don't quite make it and the ones that do physically is not all that much. So that's why they're going there. Could they go for a bigger football player? Sure, but I don't think anybody's expecting, a draftable college football player to really look at it at the moment coming out of college.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting certainly to track going forward. Now, obviously, WrestleMania was at AT&T Stadium. I'm just curious how would you kind of explain to somebody who's not into wrestling, maybe they see some tweets or whatnot, but like how would you explain and kind of put into words what WrestleMania is, and what was that experience like for you as somebody who has not only been watching for a long time, but has finally starting to get to cover it a little bit for The Athletic?
Yeah, it's a real spectacle. I mean, WWE's production team is among the best in the world in terms of putting on big events, these massive stages at these football stadiums, the lights, the pyro, the set design, all these things. It's really a absolute first class operation in that sense. Their video team, the hype videos they make before matches, as good as anything you'll find in real sports. So, WWE has really tried to improve its brand away from just being like the old school wrestling type of thing. It calls itself sports entertainment, partly for legal reasons, partly because that's what, it tries to be. It's not just sports. It's not just entertainment. It tries to be both of those. And yeah, they sold, they listed 77,000. It's probably a bit lower than that, but 2 straight nights, AT&T Stadium, basically sold out. I was there both nights, and outside of a couple spots, maybe toward the very top, place was absolutely packed 2 nights in a row. Kind of gives you a sense of how big it is.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking with an administrator a couple of years ago just about, like following college football and what, programs and teams can kind of learn. And, you kind of point out even before they, WWE hired Nick Khan, but, like look at what they're doing in terms of the entertainment and in terms of how they're appealing to fans. I'm sure you saw it in the crowd, like the diversity of ages always tends to blow me away when you look not just at the numbers on the Nielsen front, but when you go see those crowds, like you're getting dads who probably watched wrestling 15, 20 years ago. You're getting them to kind of bring in another generation. I'm sure it's one of the more unique exercises for not only for the McMahons kind of moving forward, but the enterprise itself. Has a lot to kind of I think showcase for a lot of college football programs out there that might need to be reaching new audiences. Might need to be certainly doing new media deals like they've done with Peacock and getting on broadcast television as well. I think the WWE in a lot of respects has a lot to admire and a lot for some college football programs and conference commissioners maybe to learn a little bit from as well.
Yeah, I mean, WWE was really ahead of the game when it comes to over-the-top streaming. And this was back in 2013, 2014, when they came up with the WWE Network, which is basically the only place you can watch their pay-per-views. You can buy them on pay-per-view, but for a cheaper price, you can stream it, and they put libraries of content on there. And this was before, basically the only other league doing this was like MLB.TV, essentially. And now everybody's into streaming. And WWE realized, okay, instead of putting all our resources into this, let's sell it to Peacock for, I think it was $5 billion. It was like $1 billion a year for a 5-year deal. And now that's a new revenue stream for them. And you talk about the crowds, the TV viewership age has skewed higher than it used to be. But when you go to the shows, you've got people of all ages there. You've got so many kids there and stuff like that. And they're buying every t-shirt. They're buying every souvenir cup and stuff like that. And that's exactly what WWE wants. They don't want to just be that, 18 to 34 male demographic. They're trying to reach everything, because if you get the kid, that means you get the mom who has to come with them. And if there's a sibling, and then they got to buy all the stuff. And so it's a big reason why WWE is hitting record revenues. Part of it is also a deal with Saudi Arabia and putting on shows over there, but they've really diversified a lot of where their revenue is coming. It's not just the live shows. It's not just the TV deal. And speaking of the TV deal, though, I mean, I saw today, I think it was the NBA averaged about 1.6 million per national television game viewership this regular season. Wrestling is higher than that. SmackDown on Fox is over 2 million. Raw on Monday night on USA Network is just under 2 million. So I think it's typically at the very top of the Nielsen ratings every time it's up. So I think people don't realize just how big of a market wrestling is.
Yeah, I know the folks at Fox, certainly have been happy. They're certainly by the initial numbers that were part of that deal and some of the big increases they saw. But I think everybody's pretty happy with kind of where things are. But it's a unique medium because it's not just WWE anymore. Like there are competitors out there. Certainly, there's you can even get into kind of the things like UFC and all that, which are a bit of a different category. But I mean, if you're kind of just getting into the game, how would you recommend folks kind of at home following along? What's the top storyline in your mind, and who are the competitors out there that are kind of trying to nip at the WWE's heels?
Yeah, the biggest competitor for WWE is All Elite Wrestling. They started, I want to say 2019 probably. They are on TBS every Wednesday night, TNT Thursday night, a mix of former WWE people and independent wrestlers. They have been going heavy at that, 18 to 35 male demographic. I mentioned WWE's making this big push toward younger college athletes instead of signing those independent wrestlers. AEW is signing all those independent wrestlers. So they're hiring the people with the established reputations and brands and fan bases in the wrestling world. And they've had a lot of success. They're averaging around a million viewers every week on their show Dynamite, and a lot of the people that came up through WWE's developmental are now over there. And I talked to Triple H about that and about the competition and everything like that. And I think I should have a follow-up story on that coming up pretty soon, talking about the competition. But he admits, the competition is going to make WWE better. It's been 20 years where WWE was only the big player in town after WCW and these other companies went out of business in the late 90s. So now that WWE is not going to call AEW competition. WWE is going to say our competition is Netflix. It's like, what every big company now says these days. But in the wrestling world, AEW is competition when it comes to signing wrestlers, getting someone to buy a T-shirt and stuff like that. So it was really interesting talking to Triple H about that.
I'm sure, and probably a bit of a pinch yourself moment too, getting to chat with somebody like that. I'm sure you grew up watching as well, right?
Yeah. I mean, we talked for probably about 30 minutes, and he was incredibly friendly, and he really enjoyed being there at the tryout. He's run their developmental system for about a decade now, so he likes just kind of the feeling of being around the young guys. Honestly, being around the tryout, being around him and their coaches as they looked at the participants there, it was just like being at a recruiting camp in football. I sat in on the meetings afterward. They went person by person, explained what they liked, what they didn't, how much weight could they put on someone based on their frame. It was just like sitting in a football recruiting meeting. Honestly, it's really similar. And Triple H doesn't do a lot of interviews like that. He's typically does TV stuff or conference calls. So I was really grateful that he took the time to talk about everything that they're doing with college athletics.
It's interesting because we're kind of right around the corner from the relaunch of the USFL. Obviously, there was that kind of crossover with the McGahns owning the XFL. I'm curious what you kind of think about spring football, because that is kind of right around the corner. Some older names that some college football fans might remember popping up. Shea Patterson's running the Michigan team, a few others, kind of headlining things. That it's going to be on Fox, it's going to be on NBC. Do you kind of think this is a bit of a viable outlet for people that are maybe scratching the surface of trying to get to the NFL, but are out of college football and still want to have that fix in terms of not only watching, but certainly playing along on the field between the lines?
Viable for the players, absolutely. I mean, we saw a number of guys who played in the AAF and then the XFL the next year who kept their careers going, made it onto the NFL from there. So that is very good. It's always good to have options out there. Just like I mentioned with WWE, when the NFL is the only professional football there is, because the Arena League, I don't even know if it's around anymore. It's not much. It's good to have these other options. It's good for the players. And is this USFL going to work? Is the new XFL next year going to work? I don't know. The USFL, I think they're playing all the games in Birmingham. So you're not going to have the environments, I think, that grow. But I tell you what, the XFL, when it was that 2020, early 2020, I think they had something there. You had some massive crowds in St. Louis and DC. You really got behind a lot of these teams, and the pandemic shut it down, and then the league folded. If the pandemic hadn't happened, I'm really curious to see where that would have gone, because they seem to have, different rule changes, kickoffs, and some different things I think you could have really taken to the NFL or college football or whatever. It's not going to be the same when it comes next year. I don't know what's different in the USFL yet this year. I guess we'll kind of come out and see. But I think the biggest takeaway from the other spring football leagues is that you got to have enough quarterbacks. When the quarterback play dwindles, that's when these spring leagues become kind of difficult to watch, and we saw that at times. So we'll see what the USFL looks like when it starts here. I guess it's this coming weekend now, so it's going to be interesting.
It certainly will. And I mean, speaking of, kind of new faces popping up, I mean, I know you're in Dallas. Obviously, a lot of conference realignment moves being made there, and certainly even to some big time departures. I feel like we got to ask pretty much everybody in terms of their thoughts about Big 12 Commissioner Bob Bowlesby. He's retiring. I know he's somebody that you've been around quite a few times the last couple of years. But what is the Big 12 going to do? I mean, do you have some anticipation? I know Oliver Luck, formerly of that XFL, has been mentioned quite a few times as being one of the leading contenders. I mean, do you kind of get any sense when you talk with folks, kind of in and around the Big 12, and certainly even among those incoming members that they're looking for a specific type of person they want to be as commissioner?
Yeah, I mean, Bob's retirement was not a surprise to kind of anybody who's followed it. He'd been in it for a long time. He clearly wanted to get the league back in a stable position and let someone handle the big stuff moving forward. That's what's happening. Based on comments by some of the people in the league, it doesn't look like they're going for an outsider. It doesn't look like it's going to be a George Kliavkoff situation. It seems like they want someone who's familiar with the college sports world and stuff like that. And yeah, it's big because that TV deal is coming up, and that, along with the team changes, how long you're going to keep Texas, Oklahoma, we'll see. I mean, it probably behooves the Big 12 to keep Texas and Oklahoma as long as you can, to extract as much out of them as you can. So they're going to want someone who's willing to do that, and is not just going to let them walk away at a cheap price. So Oliver Luck's name comes up for every big administrative job there is these days. I think he sued Vince McMahon over some XFL stuff at the time when he left. So there's always some connection to pro wrestling and everything somewhere. So specific names, I'm not really sure yet. It's pretty early, but I imagine they're going to want to move somewhat quickly, as they kind of got to get the next step moving forward. Sounds like Texas and Oklahoma will have kind of a hand in what's going on. So will the new schools. It makes sense because, so we'll see. I mean, it's obviously a big job, and it's just another Power 5 commissioner job change. It'll be 4 in the last handful of years. I mean, that's massive. You don't have Jim Delaney, Mike Slive, Swafford, all these other people who had been there forever, had a camaraderie. That was a big thing about the playoff, discussions and falling apart, is that none of these people had really known each other. They hadn't really worked together. It wasn't like when the playoff was formed back in 2013, 2012, when everybody kind of was able to put some things to the side because they were able to work together. That was not the case here. And another commissioner change is going to only add to that, I think, potential friction.
I mean, you and maybe your colleague Nicole Auerbach have probably spent more time at standing outside hallways and standing outside conference rooms, following those college football playoff meetings. I mean, do you kind of get a sense of what this shift might do? Obviously, they're basically looking at year 13 and being wide open in terms of what they can ultimately put on paper in terms of that expanded playoff. And I mean, this is obviously going to be a new name, somebody who's going to have to kind of get caught up to speed in terms of what the Big 12 and the new look Big 12 in particular is going to look for in the college football playoff. Do you kind of get a sense of how this could maybe slow the process down? Will this kind of hit a reset button of sorts? I know everybody's kind of focused on the ACC, but this kind of seems like it could be a bit of a more stumbling block in the near term as well, as some of those concerns the ACC expressed in terms of hitting pause on playoff expansion.
Yeah, it'll be about a year and a half until they get back to the playoff expansion discussions specific to expansion. But you look at how the last one fell apart. You had the Alliance on one side, you had Greg Sankey and Bob Bowlesby on the other, and now Bob Bowlesby's not going to be there anymore. Greg Sankey saying, "Hey, we were willing to sacrifice for this 12-team model. We may not be willing to sacrifice so much anymore." So there's a lot more saber rattling going on. I imagine that's going to continue. And remember, Bob Bowlesby was in favor of not giving automatic bids to the Power Five. Those bids would have helped the Big 12. He was concerned about antitrust and potential issues down the road there, just like the BCS had. So does that next Big 12 commissioner want the automatic Power 5 bids instead? Does the Big 12 side with the Big 10 in that sense? Who knows where the ACC is going to be on everything? The Pac-12 was for some things, not for some things. It was a real mess, by the end. And so adding another variable in there with the new Big 12 commissioner, I don't know where they're going to land.
It's going to be a fascinating story to kind of track. And I think it's going to be in the back of the minds of just about everybody, because you're going to hear about it on pretty much every weekend about college football play expansion not happening and how we are kind of stuck with 4, especially if there's, quite a case for that 5th or 6th team to kind of make it into the bracket. But I know you've also written about this recently. I think everybody's also focused on conference realignment. Obviously, a lot of changes going on at the Division I level overall. I think a lot of people are interested in kind of what happens with Conference USA. Their headquarters there in Dallas. What have you been hearing in terms of kind of the latest about where Conference USA is going to move after they bring in kind of their next wave of schools?
I haven't gotten any sense about like literally moving the conference, if that's what you mean. But I don't know where any more natural fit would be. They're so spread out anywhere. They're going to continue to be spread out. But yeah, they'll be at 9 teams when things shake out, when they lose 9 of their current 14 members, when they add some of the Liberties, New Mexico States of the world. So what I'd heard last fall was that they were going to wait to see what the new NCAA Constitution looked like, what the Transformation Committee was going to kind of look like in the summer. They may kind of change the definition of what it means to be FBS or Division I or something like that before finally making a move. But it sounds like they have been talking to a handful of schools, continue to stay in those conversations. It's a lot of the same names, kind of heard last fall still, your Tarleton States, your Eastern Kentuckys, your McNeese States. They talked with UConn, or football only for UConn. UConn wasn't that interested. UMass is very interested as football only, but Conference USA is not as interested. So they're at 9. I imagine they'll want to get a little bit bigger, but I think they're waiting to see what the landscape of Division I looks like as well.
And I mean, some of those options you kind of mentioned, Tarleton State, certainly McNeese State coming up from the FCS ranks. I mean, schools that would truthfully probably have the ambitions to kind of move up into a league like Conference USA and try to put in the amount of money and investment that they need to kind of compete. But I'm sure they're kind of stuck between a bit of a rock and a hard place, just because they don't know, like you're saying, in terms of what Division One's going to look like, and truthfully, it's just not a league in terms of having a lot of ties together. I mean, you say what you want about the Big 12, but at least they're kind of bound together in terms of all this recent history those schools have been through. That's not really the case with Conference USA. It really is a lot of new faces in a league that, frankly, is still going to have to sort itself out as we kind of go through this evolving landscape, if you will.
Yeah, and I mean, the league was reshaped a decade ago when half the league jumped to the Big East and became the American, and they raided the Sun Belt, and so it's been reshaped. I mean, this was originally a basketball conference that was headquartered in Chicago. Then it became kind of a football market conference headquartered in Dallas. I don't exactly know what it means moving forward. It's going to eventually kind of be just the bin of leftover teams, essentially, is what it's going to be by the end of this. But, you will have a number of schools who are actually happy to be in that league. Like the most vocal supporters of Conference USA that I found on Twitter, the most people staunchly upset that Southern Miss and Marshall and Old Dominion were trying to leave early. The people who were most upset about it and defending Conference USA were Liberty fans. They're not even in the league yet, but they've got a big, online fan base, just a lot of fans who are online a lot, and they were defending it. So like there are now people sticking up for Conference USA in a way that they weren't before, like in New Mexico State football, similarly, Sam Houston, Jacksonville State moving up. So it's kind of it was already a mishmash of teams. It's going to be so even more moving forward.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the more interesting things you mentioned the schools that are departing there for the Sun Belt. I think the Sun Belt is obviously a fascinating league. They come off maybe one of their better seasons they ever had in terms of football. You obviously had Louisiana doing so well. App State, consistent success they've had the last couple of years. I'm curious how you kind of see the league changing now that they do have James Madison coming up. Others like Marshall who've had some recent history of success in Conference USA. But how do you kind of see the Sun Belt shaping up for 2022 and certainly beyond?
Yeah, they're going all in on being a big football league, and I think it's working. I mean, App State, like you said, they've been very good for decades. Louisiana's been very good. We got to see what they are post Billy Napier, but Coastal Carolina has become a very good program. Georgia State has become a solid program. Then you're adding Marshall, you're adding James Madison, which is as equipped to move from FCS to FBS as I think anybody has really ever been. Southern Miss, which has struggled but has a history of success, has a fan base. And I think there's a lot of reason for excitement, and that's why those three schools wanted to join as soon as possible, because they saw the excitement that their fans were having with this move. They wanted to get in on it. They're recreating the men's soccer league, which is going to be one of the best conferences in college soccer now, adding some SEC affiliate members and stuff like that. So there's a lot of excitement about the Sun Belt, where it's going. With the American losing, Houston, Cincinnati, and UCF, there's a real jockeying for that top group of 5 spot. And Mountain West is certainly going to be in that conversation. And now I think the Sun Belt annually is going to be in that conversation as well, when you look at that playoff formula that determines, what percentage of payout that they get.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something to kind of keep track of. And I'm curious, who in your mind, obviously it's still early, a lot of transfers, I'm sure, coming in and out of a lot of programs out there. But, in your mind, as you kind of look at things here, as we hit mid-April, is there a team in your mind that can be almost that next Cincinnati? Maybe not necessarily really contending for the college football playoff, but, really scratching the surface and making making some noise in terms of that group of 5 bid?
Yeah, are you talking about for next year specifically?
Yeah, this upcoming
or
season.
just in general?
The upcoming season.
I mean, gotcha. Yeah. I think it's going to be interesting to see what SMU looks like in the first year under Rhett Lashley. They've got Tanner Mordecai back at quarterback. They've had success there the last handful of years. They just haven't closed well. They got to figure out kind of how things are closing. I think UCF, as I mentioned earlier, I think they're going to be a very good team. They should be back in that top conversation as long as they can figure out the quarterback spot. Appalachian State's got to replace a lot of its receivers, but they should be a really, really good running team. The quarterback is back as well. They've always been solid. A couple years ago, they were in the mix for that. Those are the teams that probably step out first. San Diego State's always solid. Fresno State's got a new coach. Jeff Tedford's back, but Jake Haener is there. It's really going to be wide open. Houston, I didn't mention Houston as well. They bring back a ton from last year's team that almost won the American as well. So, last 2 years, really, you kind of knew Cincinnati was that top spot unless something weird happened. But this year it's going to be, I think it's going to be wide open. I think there's going to be a lot of different teams contending for that New Year's Six spot.
Well, that's like what you like to see, certainly if you're a college football fan out there, the diversity of good teams. And I think we'll definitely see that, like you're saying, from the group of five. But until then, Chris, I appreciate your time, and certainly we will be following along. Where can we follow along for your stuff in particular? And I know for wrestling fans who maybe stuck around through the college football talk, certainly that's something you also have a podcast as well, right?
Yes, I do a wrestling podcast as well. Getting Over. It's called Getting Over Wrestling Podcast. I do with Adam Silverstein of CBS. But otherwise, just on The Athletic, college football for all my stuff there, and just at Chris Vannini on Twitter.
All right, Chris, thanks so much. All right, terrific stuff from Chris Vannini of The Athletic, and some really, really fascinating stories that he had, not just in terms of that WrestleMania and that WWE tryout, but one of the best when it comes to covering the group of five. And I'm sure we'll have a lot more on that subject in particular going forward as a lot of spring games around the country can start to get wrapped up. I know, Clemson, some other big ones just happened this past weekend. Certainly there's a lot more spring games coming this upcoming Saturday. And then the week after that really does that kind of time of year where you can kind of gaze a little bit towards that 2022 season and see, who's up and who's down, and ultimately which college football programs are going to be doing some work in the portal, as I'm sure you catch those news headlines, and pretty much half of it is about player movement and some of the bigger issues obviously facing college athletics. We get into a lot of that on extrapointsmb.com. Sign up for that Extra Points newsletter. Matt does not only a fantastic job with some of the paid and free options that he has there, but some great stuff this week. Even though he is on vacation, he's got some great freelance pieces coming in. In particular, when you're listening to this episode, should be one up there about kind of the day in the life of a student athlete, which I think is going to be pretty eye-opening for a lot of folks out there that certainly just, are used to seeing folks, pop on their screens or kind of catching them in terms of the TV highlights, but really kind of gets into some of the unique nature of being a student athlete nowadays on campus, because there's a lot that certainly goes into it. Be sure you also sign up for D1 Ticker if you haven't already. Completely free product, out there that really catches you up on some of the latest. You can find inside the Ticker in particular a lot of our Collegiate Sports Connect videos. I've been doing quite a few of those this week as well, talking with conference commissioners, some pretty high profile ADs about their tenures recently. It's a pretty turbulent time in the industry, a lot going on, which is a great place and a great reason to sign up for the D1 Ticker itself. But, I think we also try to provide some added context to a lot of those conversations. I was recently chatting with some Notre Dame men's soccer players. The D1 Council is going to meet at some point on Wednesday to kind of chat and look over a couple proposals. One of those is going to kind of change the nature of college soccer in the NCAA, and that was chatted with a few student athletes to kind of get their perspective on things. Going to be a lot of interesting conversations as well, from a lot of my colleagues, and even Matt when he ends up returning from a well-earned vacation down the road. In the meantime, though, please give us 5 stars. It really does help others kind of find this podcast. We like to grow our community. We like making sure that everybody gets 15% off their home field apparel orders by using the promo code Extra Points. That is, not only a great gift this time of year, but really some of the greatest logos you'll ever see in terms of mascots and all that, but also some of the softest T-shirts, softest joggers. They got pretty much everything in there in the catalog, and why not save that 15% off your first order? Because believe me, that first one, you will be adding a lot of things to the cart that you weren't anticipating, and it can add up, but we're always here to save you guys a little bit of money as well. Appreciate their continued support of this podcast. Connor and the gang do a great job there at Home Field Apparel. Until then, we will have another episode this week with some special guests. I don't want to tease too much about that, but should be fascinating to kind of tune into as well. I am Bryan Fischer. Enjoy the new music. If there are any complaints, be sure to send them to Matt Brown EP on Twitter. I'm Bryan D. Fischer on Twitter if you want to praise me for my solo hosting work this week. I really do appreciate that for sticking around with us. Hope you enjoyed the conversation with Chris, and we'll catch you again next week.